There's a piece of advice in storytelling that might be completely wrong.
Sort of the canned advice is share from the scar, not from the wound.
That's Renee Frojo. She's a brand and content strategist, and she's making a powerful case on why you might want to show up in your mess.
And then I started seeing examples of people who were just not sharing from the scar, but like the gaping wound. A moment of real raw vulnerability and authenticity that like is missing and that we all crave.
So if you've been feeling stuck and are unsure how to show up, blending authenticity and strategy, this one's for you. We just went to storytelling church, y'all. Y'all weren't even ready for it, but we did. Renee Frojo with us today, who is a fellow storyteller. I think I heard somewhere that you do story slams too, live story slams.
I've been experimenting with that recently.
How's it
Just
going?
local story slams. There's a little organization that's kind of doing a spin-off of the Moth. And I've gone on stage a couple of times just to really expand my abilities as a storyteller in different formats.
What have you learned about storytelling by going live on stage? Because those are two totally different ball games. Yeah.
Well, you really need to know your material going on stage, right? Like you need to have a comfort level with it because you can't read it. You can rehearse it, but you can't have it scripted. Because that just comes off as like robotic and inauthentic. Like you're not speaking to that audience there in that room, you know? So a little mess up, a little like it, and you say it differently every time. And so if you just have enough comfort with the material and you know your beats, right? You know, like your beginning, you kind of know where the like the points of humor are, where the twist is, and then like really in the ending. Like that is what successful storytelling on a stage is all about. So it's a little bit easier on social media or in content because
you can edit that crap.
You can edit. All right. You can edit it all day long. So yeah, that's one. But I will say it's a little bit easier though to come across in the way that you want to come across, right? To not be taken out of context, to be authentic. Because you're up there in your full self and you're showing your expressions and your way of speaking, and it's just so much easier to translate your you-ness on the stage. So I can see why people really prefer it as a way of reaching people.
It's wild. I think what I love about it so much is being able to see how people respond in real time, because you see response on social as in likes or comments or whatever, but seeing somebody shift in their seat or make a face at you if they don't like what you said or they disagree with you, it's scary, but it's also that live feedback that's so it's an element of storytelling I feel like that is lost online and hard to get. You know what I mean? Yeah. When you're sitting on an airplane, somebody looks over at you and they say, "What do you do for a living?" How do you respond?
Well, you know, it changes every time that question is asked. But as of late, I say I help people become better storytellers so that they can bring all sorts of opportunities into their lives. So becoming a better storyteller doesn't just help you stand out online or build an audience or get comfortable on a stage. You know, within the work I do, it helps people on sales calls and prospecting at networking events. It helps you connect better with people in person. And it's not just like learning to tell your story, but learning to really look for story and be a better communicator and be curious and notice and ask questions. You know, that's all involved in becoming a better storyteller. And it's all life skills that just help you become more connected to yourself and the people around you. I don't know that I usually give that long of an answer to people on an airplane, but
you would if it was me, because I would have asked you a follow-up question. And when in your life did you decide to dig your feet into the ground and become an expert on this topic?
It was recently, honestly. I mean, I've always considered myself a storyteller and someone who tells stories and looks for stories and has a curiosity for people's stories. I started my career as a journalist. So I've always been drawn to this sort of line of work. But I really, I sort of had this conviction starting to form up a couple of years ago that I was like, everybody needs to be a better storyteller, because I want to connect with people who are able to make meaning and sense of the world.
Yeah.
And I intuitively knew how to tell a story, and I knew how to find the interesting points in people's stories to tell the world. And I just like, this is such an incredible skill set. More people should have it.
Mm.
But in order to reach that like next level of mastery where I could then teach it as opposed to just do it intuitively, I really had to learn storytelling. So this was
Right.
about a couple of years ago. And then I started reading books on storytelling, listening to podcasts, and interviewing,
Yeah.
storytelling experts, quote unquote, and find my own frameworks and own way of using storytelling in this space. And what I realized is that there's actually not a lot of great advice on how to
Correct.
become a better storyteller online, right? Or how to
Yeah.
become a good short form storyteller for social media. Some people
Mhm.
have a little bit more of an intuitive knack for it,
Mhm.
but for like anything, it is a learned skill, and a skill that you can practice and get better at after you kind of learn the fundamentals. But a lot of
Yeah.
storytelling advice and books and all that is for how to become a better speaker on stage, or how to write a narrative, or
Yeah.
um, it's there's not a lot for how to use it effectively to capture attention and get opportunities on social. So.
What drives you nuts about this space that nobody's talking about? You high level address that, but dig in a little bit more with me. When you were reading these books and listening to these interviews and stuff, what just
Mm.
got under your skin? You're like, "Man, this is missing."
Well, I think it's this advice, this sort of like canned advice, and the questions around vulnerability and being raw, real, authenticity, like all these
Mhm.
things. It's like
Mhm.
sort of the canned advice is, I said this a lot, it's share from the scar, not from the wound.
Mhm.
Right? That you need a little bit of distance from something that's happened and some perspective so that you can turn that into a teachable lesson or a learning to
Mhm.
share with somebody else. And that's what makes a valuable story. And I started seeing, I was like, is that maybe as a whole, like that's good advice, especially because the biggest reason that people don't share their story more freely and more openly and more often is because we're afraid, right? We're afraid
Right.
of being taken out of context. We're afraid of being exposed. We're afraid of putting ourselves out there and getting a negative reaction because, it's attacking who we are or who we
Mhm.
identify as and where we belong. So people are afraid already. And then I started seeing examples of people who were just not sharing from the scar, but like the gaping wound.
Mm.
And I saw it as so brave and
Mm.
courageous, and
Mm.
like a moment of real raw vulnerability and authenticity that like is missing and that we all
Yeah.
crave from the online space. And so I started just kind of studying how they were going about it, and talking to these people and asking like, how's business now that you shared that you have a mental health disorder, right?
Right. Right.
Or that you have
Right.
this diagnosis, or that like you're actually been in a lot of debt and are actually really bad with money. Like, how's
Yeah.
business? And every
How's
single
business?
time I heard like, business has never been better. Business has never been better. Like
Mhm.
this connected me to the people who understand what I'm going through, have been through something similar, are happy someone's finally given a voice or named the feeling or named the thing,
Mm.
right? And
Mm.
like essentially dismantled the shame around it,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And someone was brave enough to do that, and it makes me feel now more seen and a little bit more courageous to maybe start questioning some of the stuff that's wrapped up in this story that I tell myself about myself, right? um And so, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I've still been trying to. I don't like necessarily have an answer, but I'm questioning it and trying to tackle it and finding examples and and experimenting with myself, and like how
Yeah.
much I share, how vulnerable I get.
Yeah.
Um and I would say it's just it's a matter of practice and experimenting. It's like trying one thing that feels really uncomfortable and seeing how it feels and seeing how
Mhm.
people respond.
Mhm.
And this is what I
Mhm.
encourage people that, I work with and take my cohort to do. I'm just like, let's try this one that feels scary, but it's still kind of safe. And now let's go, like, let's push that a
Yeah.
little bit more and let's push that. And the reaction always is, God, that really resonated with somebody. That really,
Right.
that opened up this whole line of communications.
Mhm.
So far, I haven't had a bad experience or heard of a bad experience. I
Yeah.
guess worst case scenario, you can just delete it. you know?
Mhm. When you were sharing about the scar thing, because that's what, I've always been taught too, and, um, before I was doing this work, I was a therapist for a short amount of time, and, they
Mm,
always taught you never share, and it was just different. That's you're being a therapist, talking to somebody, but it just stuck in my brain, and it's carried over into storytelling and the content that I make and stuff. You share from your scars, that whole thing, which there's wisdom in that to a degree, but also too, I feel like there's such a agenda undertone in
mm,
those stories because then I'm positioning myself as expert hero as
totally.
opposed to on the same plane. And what you're talking about is saying like, yo, we're level here together. And I think tell me
That's
your
really
opinion
well
on
said.
this,
Hmm.
is I feel like a lot of brand builders feel like we need to position ourselves. I mean, it's the whole Donald Miller thing,
Hmm.
as the hero of the story versus the person we're trying to reach. And it takes so much killing of the ego to be
Hmm.
willing to be seen imperfectly. And that turns some people off because some
Hmm.
people are going to be like, I don't want to work with Heather if this, or that's so unprofessional of Heather, which is their own shit. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
What's your perception on that? Because you also do brand narratives, not just
Right.
people telling their story, but telling a story
Right.
for a brand.
Yep. Absolutely. It's a little bit different with brands, but even within the brand narrative, like the most successful brands are the ones that have been able to effectively personify their brand,
Mhm.
right? The ones that
Right.
show up in your mind as a person that shares your values, that shares your wants, hopes, desires, needs that you're aligned with. Like that takes a lot of crafty work, right?
Right.
To personify a brand, and it that is more where like positioning your customer as the hero and yourself as the guide is a very useful framework,
Mhm.
right? And there are ways to then like get. I'm trying to think of brands that are like really effectively also getting on the level of their customer and saying, "This is us. Is this you too?"
Yeah.
There's a lot right now. There's a lot. I mean, set juice brand. Um,
I don't know.
uh, well, it's of course not going to come to me now. Um, but there are ways to do it, and it's ultimately just like really understanding your customer, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
understanding what drives them, and
Right.
making that point of connection. Um, but that wasn't your first question. Um,
Yeah,
your
just wrestling with it with you of the whole this idea that we need to position ourselves as an authority and whatever that means, and it's too risky to be
mm,
honest because then people aren't going to respect us, yada yada yada, that whole
yeah,
thing.
right, that whole thing. Okay, so two things there. One, if you were to honestly show up and say, this is who I am, this is how I operate, this is what I believe in, this is what I disagree with, and someone didn't like that about you, do you want
Mhm.
to work with that person anyway?
Right. Right.
Right?
Right.
You belong to a different tribe. Okay, so that's the first thing I always ask. Like, is this someone that you're going to enjoy being in conversation with, working
Mhm.
with? Like, are you
Mhm.
going to clash probably eventually? Okay, number two is um, there's this book called The Human Brand, And it's researchers out of Yale that basically talked about this whole idea of, the most successful brands really personified. And they essentially did a bunch of studies on credibility and how we measure credibility and how we size people up. So
Mm.
what you're speaking to is people are afraid of looking not credible, right? Of not being
Right.
taken
Right.
seriously, of not being, by not positioning themselves as the expert. So their credibility is measured by two things. It is warmth. So that is how approachable, how likable, how friendly
Mm.
you are perceived by the other person, and
Mm.
competence, right?
Mm.
How good you are at your job, how effective you are at getting something done. But it has to be a mix. Too much competence without warmth equals not credible. You're not
Yeah.
someone who is to be trusted. That's why doctors have a really hard time actually getting patients to listen to them, because
Mm.
if they don't have that warmth piece, then they're just the
Mm.
expert that's not trusted. That's
Right.
just, what do they know? They don't
Right.
understand me. They don't understand my situation. And then too much warmth without competence is also an imbalance, right? If
Yeah.
you share too much of that and don't position yourself as within your expertise, um, then you're lacking that critical competence piece. So it's a balance, but you need both ultimately. And a lot of people, most people, especially the way that they're trying to show up online and posture and present themselves, is they skew too expert. They skew too
Yeah.
much in the competence realm without a lot of warmth.
Yeah.
And that usually they can see that in the results and how they reach people or struggle to reach people.
Can you give me an example where you have used the open wound in your storytelling, or even maybe even a status or something, and like just kind of your thought process behind sharing it, how you formulated it, yada, 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 just so we can kind of ground this in a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, I have kind of a meta example where I really
Sure.
started talking about this and exploring it. I have a lot of examples of other people who have done it.
Hmm.
And I kind of use their stories as a jumping off point to start talking about my issue with this.
Yeah.
But my attempt then to do it on myself and I've told the story a lot, um, is talking about this time after my divorce. So I
Hmm.
went through a divorce 7 years ago now to a man that I was married to for 7 years and together with for
Yeah.
10. We have two children together. And during the initial phases of our breakup, I uh, I was a mess. I was a huge
Yeah.
mess.
Yeah.
I was like
Sure.
starving. I wasn't
Sure.
eating. You
Mm.
know, I went the opposite of eating all my feelings. I ate nothing at all, and
Mm.
I decided what I really needed to do is date. I was like, I'm going to date all of San Francisco. I'm going to go on Hinge. I'm going to date every single man, that I can find. And I did. I went on all these dates and I realized that my way of processing hard things was just to talk. I talked to everybody. I talked to my Uber driver. If
Mm.
anybody asked me, like, how are you? I'd be like, well, I'll tell you how I am, right? And before that, um, and I entered all of these dates just in that way. I was like completely 100% unapologetically myself, where I felt
Mm.
like I had nothing to lose because I was like, I've lost everything. I can only
Yeah.
go out from here, right?
Yeah.
And what happened was I never had a bad date.
Mm.
And I left every single, single interaction with a stranger, including my Uber drivers, feeling a little bit more connected to another
Mm.
human being.
Mm.
And I ended up understanding a lot about myself in that process too. But ultimately, what I learned is that just being so vulnerable and opening up that space to just say, here I am in all my mess, gave people permission to open up and
Yeah.
share their mess with me. And what resulted was like a really deep level of human
Yeah.
connection and interaction that went way beyond small talk. And I got friendships out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got a ton of good storytelling out of it. But more than anything, I felt connected to other humans, and I felt very connected to myself. Now,
Yeah.
like there's a limit. Like, I wouldn't go to a big networking event and someone ask me, how are you? I'd be like, well, yeah, I'm having a huge fight with my boyfriend right now. Or like, maybe I
Right,
would,
right,
depending on the
sure,
person.
sure.
But ultimately, I haven't been stung by being too open.
Mm,
Um, and again, there's like you gotta kind of be careful when you're online because you're broadcasting to a bunch of people
right,
that don't have
right,
any context, right? They're
right,
coming in
right,
the middle of the story.
right.
Um, but I'm still pushing those limits. I'm still finding those limits. I can't tell you where those limits exist. And it's
Yeah.
probably on an individual basis. I mean, have you
Your
shared a
gut.
very vulnerable story? Maybe it's your gut. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
it's intuition. If it feels forced or if it feels, yeah, maybe that's a question to ask yourself. Like, why am I sharing this?
Mhm.
You know?
That's another thing I wanna wrestle with you on, and, you know, some of these questions I'm asking you, I'm not sure there's ever really an answer, it's like we're gonna be asking ourselves this probably for the end of time, but I think the idea of figuring out what it means to be a human being online is a fascinating
mm,
conversation,
hmm
um, especially when the online space and the physical space is going to merge more and more and more with AI humans and us not necessarily to be on screens to be interacting in the cyber world. I mean, like, we are just in such a wild time, and
hmm
these conversations around humanity and story are so it goes beyond just helpful marketing business advice
hmm
into saving. I'm being dramatic AF, but I believe it with all my heart, saving humanity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I wanted to ask you, like, this is messy, and I think I struggle with it too, is as a somebody who's growing and building, and I get what we're doing online is part connection and part marketing, and there's
hmm
strategy behind it. When I'm wanting to be more authentic and share the open wound online and so forth, part of me hesitates. I know the power of it, but it
mm,
hesitates going, the moment I'm trying to use this as marketing, there's an agenda again, so it feels
hmm
cheapened to me, and maybe I'm overthinking it, um, or, or virtue signaling or whatever they call it.
hmm
But I worry about that a lot of like, okay, Heather, when do you merge the line between you're being more authentic versus you're fabricating
hmm
authenticity because it's a strategy?
hmm
Now I'm a
hmm
marketer too, friend. Like I get it.
hmm
But also
hmm
this is something as a human I struggle with
hmm
because it is a weird line, and maybe it is a case by case thing, but I'm just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I wonder. I think maybe what I encourage people to do and what I push myself to do is recognize that these businesses are they're not separate entities, right?
Mhm.
We're completely intertwined with our business.
Totally.
And so, but we try to kind of separate ourselves out. And instead, maybe if we just accept that this is like our whole selves, and sometimes it's our strategic selves, and sometimes it's our,
Mm.
professional services selling selves, and sometimes
Mhm.
it's just our looking for purpose and meaning and helping people and bringing value in the ways that we bring value. Like maybe some of the stuff that we create doesn't need to have that agenda, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't need to serve that greater business purpose. And it's just if this is something that has been impactful to you, or a shift that's really helped you, or even a question you're still struggling with, right? It's gonna help someone else in that way. And it can just be that, it
Mhm.
can be a person
Mhm.
that will never buy your services, will never listen to your podcast, will never,
Right.
subscribe to your
Right.
newsletter. And like, is that enough for you? Is that enough for you to
Right.
say, I'm sharing this because it's meaningful to me, it's
Yeah.
helped me, or I'm
Yeah.
still struggling with it, and I'm using this forum where I'm
Mm.
showing up as much as I'm showing up in my family and with my friends and
Mm.
my real community, in my offline community, Right? Like, what's the purpose of sharing any of it? It's to understand ourselves and understand the world around us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a messy answer, maybe to a messy question, but I guess, yeah, I get it. I get your struggle, and I think I struggle with it as well. But it's the question that I was grappling with, actually, based on something that you said in one of your earlier podcasts, right? That
Mhm.
maybe if we can stop, like, just worrying so much about who's watching and really pay attention to who's listening,
Yeah.
that's where we're going to find some of these answers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, what if we just try to speak to the people who are already listening? And what do
Yeah.
we need to hear from them in return, right? Like, sometimes I put stuff out on social media more than anything because I'm looking for answers for myself,
Yeah.
right? I'm kind of
Yeah.
using that beautiful crowdsourcing
Mhm.
tool to
Mhm.
understand something that I'm grappling with. And it's like
Yeah.
a creative collection or a collective creating. I like to think of it that like that sometimes too. Um, but yeah, and then sometimes accepting that, like, you need to kind of use what you have to drive your business forward. That is also authentically a pursuit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right. I like
it's
the
tough.
idea you had at the beginning of it's not necessarily separate selves, like looking at us more holistically and it's okay. And I mean, there's a lot there, whether we should or shouldn't, or if it's right or wrong. I don't know the answer, but regardless, we are merging into a very like dual identity with tech and with
Mm,
humanity. Maybe not my age, but I know my kids for sure, and definitely
mm-hmm.
my grandkids, where it's just going to get more and more integrated. Of like, it's not Instagram Heather, which I don't think that'll be around by the time I have grandkids, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
Instagram human. It's just humanity in being translated digitally. It's weird. I don't know. I can go down a rabbit hole with you on that, but I wanted to ask you, when you're going to like these events, you facilitate in person workshops, which is so
Mm,
cool. When you're sitting with these folks, what is the glaring number one hiccup, hesitancy, roadblock, resistance, whatever, that people who desire to tell their stories and be more authentic face? Is it the actual structuring of the story? Is it finding their story? Is it the bravery to share their story? Or is it something else?
mm. I think across the board, most people just are afraid to share their story.
Yeah.
They're afraid of that exposure. Um, they're afraid of having something reflected back on themselves. You know, they're afraid of being misunderstood. They're afraid of being taken out of context. Um, yeah, I think we're all just afraid of really feeling exposed and then not being liked, right? Or not fitting in, or not, like, that primal sense of belonging is so strong.
Mm-hmm.
And what I argue is telling your story helps you figure out where you belong and helps other people figure out if they belong with you or not,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's the very things that we're afraid of that ultimately are the ones that unlock so much, for us in terms of potential and opportunity and connection and answers and
Mm.
all these things, I think I found in my experience.
Inner work. Inner work, inner work, inner work. You said somewhere, I think it was on LinkedIn, something along the lines of the gift that storytelling gives us is a lot of this self-awareness and
Mm.
self-acceptance and really getting grounded in your identity and who you are, which I freaking love that because we always think it's like, I need a storytelling structure and a badass hook and all this stuff when
Yeah.
really like the essence of it is something so deep and spiritual and something
Mm.
that will change your life regardless how it performs on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious with you. I know a little bit of your story of what I've been able to find online and sitting here with you, but you seem like a very grounded person. You seem like you have a connection to something and know who you are.
Mm.
as much as humanly possible, because whatever that
Mhm.
means.
Mhm. I'm
What are your
always
what's your
yeah.
take on kinda the inner work behind all of this stuff? Maybe
Mm.
your own personal experience or maybe how you walk people through it, because I think at the end of the day, that is the game.
Yeah, I agree. I think the best storytellers are the most self-aware.
Mhm.
And I mean, for me, it's a constant pursuit of that self-awareness. It's or of just again of understanding. I think I seek to understand myself. I'm interested in people and their stories because I seek to understand. I'm curious to understand what drives them, why it matters, what motivates us, what motivates any of this. I don't know where that comes from.
You always been
Um,
like that, even, like, little
yeah,
girl? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder. I wish I had an example. I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, and maybe some of it comes from my parents. My mother's always been that way. I always joke that she could, talk to a brick wall, like if it would listen. Like
Yeah.
and it all, she has the most amazing conversations. She ends up having the most amazing interactions with people throughout her life, everywhere she goes. Anytime she gets on an airplane or in a cab or,
Mm.
is in a group of people, she always comes away with the most interesting stories. And it's just driven by her curiosity.
Mm.
She just her just curiosity stirred her. And I wonder if some of that just comes from her. Um, but my own, I think, I wonder if part of it is also I just wrote about this in my last newsletter. I had a big tragedy in my early childhood. I lost both my older brother and then my dad a year later.
Damn. I'm
And
so
I was before
sorry.
I was 6. Yeah, it's a story I've told a lot. And what I recently told, a story that I recently told about that story was this sort of journey to discovery about something that why I'm so motivated here. And here's what, at least in my own psychoanalysis of myself, I feel like I've uncovered. I think that losing, the two most important men in my life at such a young
Mm.
age and having then a grieving mother, who very much was very brave and resilient and took care of me and did what she did, was also a grieving mother. My survival instinct kicked in and I
Mm.
had to figure out how to survive, right? And so I think part of what happened to me is I became a brave little girl, and I put on this brave little face and I had this armor and I carried that into, early adulthood, and especially in my relationships with men. I think I
Yeah.
was so afraid of losing
Right.
someone that I never
Right.
fully let them in. And so, I used to brag that like I had never been dumped. I was never dumped. I always left someone before they left me, right? And
Mm.
I was never heartbroken for too long, because the story I told myself was that I was resilient and I was brave and I could get over these things. And like because I'd been through so much hardship, like I knew how to persevere. But
Mm.
what I really think was happening is that I just didn't let anybody in close enough to care,
Yeah.
like I had that shield. And I think that's ultimately what led me to my marriage with a
Yeah.
man who also struggled with intimacy, true intimacy in that way. Um, and I think a lot of our, we cared for each other a lot. There is definitely love, and there are a lot of things that made that marriage work. But ultimately, I think we were both pretending,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until I went through that huge loss, which is a much bigger loss because I created so much of my life revolved around that marriage. It's why I live in
Right.
the Bay Area now. It's why I have these 2 children.
Right. Right.
In some ways, it's why I've pursued my line of work. And ultimately, I realized what like I'm craving so much is that connection because I didn't allow myself to be vulnerable, to be
Mm.
really open, to be really raw. You know, they say we
Mm.
teach what we seek to understand. And that all started clicking for me just recently. I think the reason why I'm so interested in this work, why I'm so interested in understanding human connection and creating spaces for that connection and encouraging people to tap into that
Yeah.
vulnerability is because like what I just don't see that's it the very thing that I was like protecting myself from was the thing that led to one of the biggest losses of my life. That was control almost, right?
Wow.
Like I
Yeah.
couldn't control the death of my father
Right.
or my brother, but I could control ultimately like who I ended up getting into a relationship with, why that relationship, worked or didn't work, and ultimately now. So, and it's still a work in progress, but I've come a long way.
Damn.
I'm now with someone who I've been with for 5 years, who I recognize I would be devastated if I lost, but
Mm.
I feel so much more grounded and whole in this relationship because I'm fully being loved and know
Mm.
how to love. So
Mm.
yeah, it's all, I can't separate that from the work I do now. It's all
Yeah.
connected. So um
And how did you
yeah.
start, I guess, feeling more comfortable? You said earlier that people, the courage to share their story or to be vulnerable or whatever. Um, Obviously, practice is
Yeah.
a huge element of it. It just gets a little bit easier. I don't think it ever gets super easy. Maybe if it does, you're not being vulnerable enough. I don't know. But like with you, therapy, books, yoga, like what were some of like the beginning things for you? Because I mean, I know you've experienced this too. There's a lot of folks listening um, who God has just put something on their heart so strong and
Mm,
they feel it in their bones and they know it's time, but it's like you're standing on a cliff and your feet are halfway off of it and it's just kind of like rocking and you just need that one little extra thing. What was it for you where you suggest for people who are right there, they just haven't taken the leap?
mm. I mean, I guess I'd ask myself or ask yourself, like, what have I really done to try to understand myself and my choices and what motivates me and where I am today and what is holding me back?
Hmm.
Like really try to get clear on why. What is it? Is it the fear of
Right.
something? The fear of shame, the fear of loss, the fear of not being picked, of being unwanted. Like it's something. It's something for all of us, right? Driven probably by early childhood experiences, right? And experiences
Yeah.
throughout our life, by culture, um, by society, by all these forces, and getting clear on understanding that, I think, is the first step to overcoming it, right? It's just
Mm.
like it's that understanding, it's acceptance, and then it's what's the next step in the AA program? Action.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the action can't happen without those first two steps. Um, I did some therapy after my divorce. Was the first time I did therapy, not for very
Yeah.
long. Um, but I find like just being able to have these conversations and asking those questions and talking about it out loud. I think like how you do probably so many of the people on this podcast. Do it with your friends, do it with your family. Like in conversation, we get clarity too.
Yeah.
It's not really in isolation. You're not going to be able to sit there and think your way through this necessarily. Like maybe you can help you can use ChatGPT, which is the number one use case, by the way, for ChatGPT right now is people trying to help understand themselves.
So wild.
But it's limited because that is just a tool that's going to continue
Right.
reflecting things back to you, right?
Right.
That you prompt it with. So I don't think it's as powerful or robust or as intuitive as another human. You know, who
Yeah, because
who
I mean, at
cares?
least right now, we have that intuition where you can look me in the eyes and I'll tell you something, and you're like, Heather, you can
Yeah,
feel there's
yeah,
something underneath the thing as opposed to taking my words face value.
totally.
Man. Um, okay, so what we've talked about so far is we've talked about, we started off with this idea of not just speaking from your scars, but the bravery it takes and the demand, honestly, I think from people. They want to see people speaking from their fresh wounds. And that doesn't take away from your brand or your authority. It's, I think it was Terry Rice who said it's a shortcut to credibility, which you mentioned earlier. Um, in order to be credible, you need to be warm and competent, not
Mm-hmm.
perfect, warm
Mm-hmm.
and competent,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we talked about like people struggle with that because obviously it's vulnerable, it's scary. We're trying to control perception. I think
Mm-hmm.
where I want to kind of go into next, rounding the corner of our conversation is as someone who studies this intently and you're heavily involved in AI, I believe, and understanding how to use AI, you know, with story. I've seen you mention it a few times, I think, on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
What is your intuition, perception, guess? Because really it's a guess at this point
Mm-hmm.
of how our role as storytellers is going to evolve. Um, it hurts my feelings, and maybe it's just because I'm old and precious about things, but
Mm-hmm.
like I like learning frameworks. I
Mm-hmm.
like learning why different beats and lines and words work better than others. I think it's just
Mm-hmm.
really fascinating. So knowing that that's going to be less in demand, people who understand that because you can put it into a chat
Mm-hmm.
bot or whatever. I honestly kind of get discouraged sometimes as a storyteller because I'm like, but I like it. I want to do it. I don't want a freaking bot to do it for me, But then a friend of mine was like, well, Heather, maybe, storytelling is going to go to another level and there's going to be, whatever. I'm just high level philosophical, messy ass throw up question. But where do you see kind of this going as a career?
Mm.
Um, and what are maybe skill sets that you're really wanting to hone in on
Mm-hmm.
that you don't think will ever be threatened with AI?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the big existential question for all of
That's
us.
like my whole podcast is existential questions.
Yeah. Um, well, I think what's interesting is to really look at all the trends and the patterns. And what I've been trying to do is become more of a third order thinker. So, more of a systems thinker, more of a futurist in this way. Futurists are third order thinkers. And what that means is first order thinking is this happened, so then this, right?
Hmm.
The eggs are more scarce because of bird flu, so now the price of eggs is more expensive. That's first order thinking.
Okay.
Second order thinking is in saying, okay, so what? So then what happens next? So what now? Okay, so eggs are more expensive. So maybe people are going to stop buying eggs so much and look for other sources of protein. So maybe instead of eggs for breakfast, people are going to start buying more ham, and the pork industry is going to see a surge. So okay, then so what? Okay, so what happens next? So now you're thinking, okay, systematically, what could change now because of this trend? So
Mm.
now third order thinking. So you're thinking like way ahead now into what the knock-on effects of this one thing are going to
Yes.
be.
Yes.
And I think that's a really valuable way to start thinking about all these things that are happening now and how it may impact you specifically, or your industry,
Right.
or your role. Um, because the people that can think in those third order ways can, one, get ahead of where things
Right.
are going,
Right.
right? And be a little bit more prepared, as
Right.
opposed to reactive, which is the majority of all humans and most of the things we do. Even at a government and systems level, we're constantly reacting to things,
Right.
not
Right.
thinking ahead. Like, it's really hard for us to do that. I think futurists are very much in demand right now for these reasons. Um, and what I'm seeing that is interesting already, just within like the past year, is that the top three use cases for AI and these large language models was data analytics and
Right.
research, and I forget number three, but now it's People are using it as a therapist, right? As a business coach.
Mm.
They're looking at using it to find purpose, to find meaning. So what I keep hearing, which I think is really true, is maybe this is actually going to make us more human again, because the way
Mm-hmm.
that we've been operating up until now and how we're showing up now and how we're working is we're operating more like robots, right? We're
Correct.
optimizing our lives, optimizing our children's, optimizing our businesses for efficiency, you know, modeling
Yes.
ourselves off of
Yes.
the freaking factory widget model.
Right.
And, the optimistic take is that all of that automation, all that efficiency, all that expertise, AI is going to be, with super intelligence prompting itself to do that stuff. We don't even
Yep.
need to learn how to prompt because AI is going to be
Correct.
prompting itself, right? Freeing up space then, hopefully, in an ideal world for us to actually get back to what it means to be more human, to maybe do hobbies that we don't need to monetize, right? To like
Right.
be creative for the sake of creativity, to
Right.
create more spaces for connection, to come back to religion, to come back to spirituality.
Mm.
And you're seeing this happening.
Yes.
So I really I've kind of like my existential crisis has come and gone in waves, but really I'm kind of in a very peaceful place right now of sort of hope and acceptance that like actually I'm finding more time to just do the thing that brings me meaning in this world, is connecting with humans more intimately and exploring that together, right? Like those questions of our existence and purpose, like together more openly and having
I,
more time to do so, So that's kind of where I'm at.
no, I
And
love it. It gets me excited. It's hopeful.
right.
I was just having this conversation earlier today about the inception of ideas and imagination, and like the things that you teach others to do and help them walk through, which is not just the last half of storytelling, which is like crafting and framing, but also the first half, which we've talked about, which is kind of the ideation, self awareness,
Mm-hmm.
the telling up ideas, and creating just a wealth of inspiration and excitement, and just that which gets passed over quite a bit because it's not the sexy framework that can hack into something fast. It takes work, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also so exciting to think about if AI is taking that last half,
Mm-hmm.
how us becoming masters at how to be inspired and come up with ideas. There's not a lot of content about that. I don't know if you've done like Google searches and stuff, but I was Googling like how do I develop imagination and be, because I want to be more imaginative. There's not a lot of stuff on that. But what are we going to have to be masters at over the next however
Mm-hmm.
long? That.
Yeah, I know. And I say this, it's like, yeah, so practically what does that mean? Who are the people who have work? Who are the people who, and I have explored this a little bit, and again, like you said, it's anyone's best guess right now, but I think it's the people who are helping the rest of us make meaning of what it means to be human, right? It's the
Yeah.
people who are able to inspire and gather people in community,
Hmm.
right? It's the people who are going to help us tap into our creativity. Um, so I don't know. I see a rise of like I've emotionally intelligent people.
Thank
I saw
God.
this quote somewhere once before too. It's like um, in the past it was about muscles. Now it's about brains. And in the future, it's going to be about heart, something like that. Like, it's
Thank you,
right.
God. Thank you, God.
Um, so anyway, I think also that the stories that we're telling now and the narrative that we're telling and the narrative of the future that we're telling is also going to help shape it. So are we
Amen.
telling stories of a dystopian,
Amen.
robot
Yeah.
future? Or are we telling stories of a more utopian return back to what
Amen.
makes us human?
Come on. We just went to storytelling church, y'all. Y'all weren't even ready for it, but we did. Um, Renee, where can people? I have a final question for you that everybody's going to need to hear the answer to this because it's going to be a good one.
Mm,
But before then, thank you for coming on. Thank you for showing up in the world as a human being first and helping other people tap back into themselves and putting out more good, life giving content online. I tell people all the time we need more good people
mm,
putting out good content, not
mhm,
clickable content and sexy content, like life giving
mm.
content.
I love
And
that.
that's what you're doing is you're helping this landscape become cleaner and brighter and more hopeful by helping storytellers tell their story. We have a bunch of people I know who need support with this listening right now. So where would you like to direct them to get your help?
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, good reputation online. That is, that's where you find my newsletter, where I talk about all of these things in depth every week.
Mm-hmm.
And it has that double meaning too. It's not just how to build a good reputation, but how to build a good reputation and be a
Yeah.
good human and
Yeah.
create good work and do good in the world. And on LinkedIn, Renee Frojo. I create content there on the
I've
regular.
got to get better about LinkedIn. I struggle with LinkedIn.
I can help you. I've
I don't know if
it's
I
that
want to
same
be helped.
thing. Yeah, I
I
mean,
know. I
yeah,
know.
it really, I bet again, I think if you can come at it from this place of like, I have a story to share and I want to connect with those other good people
Mm,
sharing those
I know.
stories. It can be, it's just like anywhere,
I
moving to
know.
a place where you feel like you don't have anything in common with the people, you find your people,
Yeah.
you know?
I know. Okay. I say it's so funny how many times I've said that on this podcast. People who listen to it are like, yeah, whatever, Heather, because I'm always like, LinkedIn. I don't know. Listen, all that will be linked in the show notes, friends. Very last question, Renee. What is something in your life? It can be related to what we've talked about here. It could be something totally left field. But what's something lately you have had a big question mark around and you've been wrestling with and trying to find the answer? It could be silly thing you have been Googling on the internet. It could be a book you're reading that you have no idea. I mean, it can be anything, but what's been on your mind lately that you're like, hmm,
um, I have been wrestling with this idea of originality.
Lord Jesus, you have another hour?
Yeah, I like it's
Wow.
it's like be original.
Yep.
We want to read original thoughts and ideas, but again, why? And what does that
Hmm.
mean? And
Hmm.
how when do
Can
why
it
is it,
win?
and there's so much pressure with to be original, and do we always need to be original? And how do we get more original ideas? How do we become more original thinkers? Yes, I think it's
Yeah.
important, but how and why? And what's the limit? And along with what? So I'm starting to put my thoughts together on that.
Yeah.
But would love your thoughts on that.
I'm reading, I thought it was right here, Self Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And you want to
Mm.
talk about your girl using ChatGPT on the regular trying to get through that book because I'm like, what? Because the way he talks is so different. But anyway, what I was reading this morning, it's so wild that you're saying this, is he was really going off on people who use other ideas and regurgitate them or share it. He's kind of like anti steal like an artist
Mm.
before that book even came out, which I don't know. I've always told people, creativity is just pairing two things together in a different way. That's all it is. Because people are like, I'm not creative. And I'm like, no, dude,
Mm-hmm.
all you got to do is mix things together that don't
Mm-hmm.
go together. But then if we question, like, the ingredients need to be something that you created versus someone else, then that puts so much more pressure on things. Now, I understand what Emerson was saying because he's saying sometimes we use that as a crutch to not
Mm.
push a line and like push
Mm.
something further. It's like, well, why? Is that the best way? Or
Mm.
coming up with, which I've been guilty of, you know? So I don't know. It's funny because I literally read that this morning and I'm like, is it possible to be original? Or is maybe the pursuit of being original just a call for us to push ideas further than we would?
Mm,
I don't know.
I like that question. I
Well,
think
we
that's a good
have
question.
this was the most deep ass conversation ever. Thank you for being willing to go there with me. If you guys have an idea, I'd love to hear your thought on originality. But anyway,
Yes.
uh, Renee, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome.
Thank you.